So this article written by me arose out of a bit of a challenge. I was, challenged with being able to get something published philosophically on ghosts. And this is the result. It involves a philosophical examination of ghosts. And although ghosts are fascinating, and I find them especially fascinating, dating way back to my childhood, there's been very little actually philosophically on the subject of ghosts. There's probably the first reference was in Plato's Phaedo, in which they were mentioned but not examined in much detail. So the purpose of this is to consider the issue of the existence of ghosts within the context of modern philosophy of mind. And the reason for this is because of the way I define ghosts. So how do I define ghosts? Well, just like going back to, talking about religion, when we talked about the existence of God, before we can decide whether ghosts can exist or not, we have to be clear about what we mean by ghost. Just like when you're talking about God, we have to be clear about what we mean by God. So the definition I put forth is as follows, and you should keep in mind, of course, that just because I defined it this way, it doesn't mean that it's the correct way. And as always, definitions in philosophy can be disputed. So here are the qualities of a ghost that I'm accepting. The first thing is that a ghost is a mind, and it's a special sort of mind. It has to have been disembodied through the death of its original body. So this matches our normal intuitions, because ghosts are dead people. Second, it has a capacity to interact with the physical world in some manner, which is an important condition, because otherwise we have to think of, heaven as being haunted with ghosts. But we don't think of, heaven as being haunted with ghosts just because there are, dead people there. So the ghost is a disembodied mind, disembodied through death, that can interact with this physical world. Now, in terms of the interaction, I accept a very wide range. Maybe it can be sensed by others, that it can, manipulate the physical environment, and has some other, perhaps, capacity for interaction. So it has to be able to, do something. Now, I'm also not assuming that ghosts must be immaterial or incorporeal, even though, kind of in fiction and in, games, ghosts are generally assumed to be, incorporeal undead. Why not just assume they have to be an immaterial entity? Well, this would of course beg the question by simply assuming what they must be without trying to prove it. And we have to keep the possibility that ghosts could be material entities, physical beings, of a very special sort. We need to keep that open. The first theory of mind is what's called identity theory. And this is a materialist or physicalist theory of mind. The mind is composed of matter, as opposed to being made of ghosty stuff. And it's called identity theory because each mental state, such as experiencing a particular pain or a particular flavor, would be identical to the state of the central nervous system. So, to use a totally fictional example, the taste of, say, vanilla might be neurons 224, 225, and 226 firing. And again, that's just totally made up. But the idea is that each mental state would be identical to a state of the central nervous system. They would be the same. So the taste of vanilla would be that firing would be the taste of vanilla. So on this view, the mind is equivalent to the central nervous system and its states. And this provides an easy answer to the question, could there be ghosts? And the answer would be, well, no. Because if the mental states are identical to that brain, then the death of the brain would be the end of the mind, because they are identical. They're one and the same thing. Now, one thing I don't consider in this article, but it could be kind of like a workaround in a way, would be to say, well, they couldn't be a ghost, but you could have a zombie. Because a zombie, is a dead person that's still moving around. But of course, the obvious counter to that is, yeah, it'd be a zombie, but not a ghost. So on the identity theory of mind, ghosts are an impossibility. Zombies, though, could still exist. It would just be the dead brain still somehow functioning. Now, with substance dualism, this is the view, we've seen it before, it's kind of a stock philosophical view, that reality contains at least two fundamental types of entities. Material entities, physical, bodies, extended, and immaterial entities, minds, souls, spirits. So on this view, the mind is an immaterial substance with a special causal relation with its body. And this special relation allows the mind to control and receive information from the body. And so it allows the body to affect the mind to affect the body. And I don't mention it in the article, but this gives rise to the infamous mind-body problem. Namely, how does that even work? So on this view, ghosts would be a real possibility. In fact, this is probably the most in accord with our intuitions about ghosts, the stories, that the body dies and an incorporeal and non-physical entity, the mind, persists. So on the view of substance dualism, the mind is a separate substance. So on the death of the body, the mind could keep on going. And we saw before we talk about substances that substances are entities that can exist on their own. So the mind could keep on going after death, depart the body. And again, this is kind of the traditional, standard, popular view of how, souls and ghosts work. Now, what about the critical part of interaction after death? Well, this also is taken care of, because even though there's the mind-body problem, how does that work? The assumption is that the mind could interact with its original body back when, the body was alive. And so if that's accepted, then it makes sense that it could interact with the physical world even when bodiless, because that's what it does. Now, it's reasonable, of course, to consider that the lack of the original body could limit the mind's capabilities. And this could be taken as explaining why ghosts tend to be pretty limited in what they can do. Like, in general, with some notable exceptions, you don't have ghosts typically manifesting, clearly visible, giving speeches, using phones, typing up stuff on the internet, blogging, etc., which you think they would do if they existed. But anyways, they're often said to be limited to making faint noises, moving small objects, maybe a little bit of faint whispering, raising lowering temperatures. And so if we accept substance dualism, then ghosts are a very real possibility, because they're the standard metaphysics for ghosts. In addition to substance dualism, there's also what's called property dualism, which is somewhat similar with a big difference. So for property dualists, the mind and the body are not distinct substances. The mind is composed, at least in part, of mental properties that are not identical with physical properties. For example, the property of being a painful feeling would not reduce to a particular physical property of the brain, such as the states of certain neurons. So the mind and body on this view are distinct, but they're not distinct substances. Now, you could still have a substance view. You could say that, there is a material substance, but this material substance has distinct physical and mental properties. Or you could have kind of weirdly have a mental substance and say there are physical properties, but kind of not really, and also mental properties of a distinct sort. So you've got two fundamentally different types of properties. So what are the possible views here? Well, one form of property dualism is called Epiphenomenalism. And on this view, there's a one-way relation between the mental and the physical. What's this relation? Well, the non-physical mental properties are caused by, but do not cause, the physical properties of the body. So the mind is effectively causally inert and can be thought of as a byproduct of the physical processes of the body. So because these mental processes, or rather properties, are causally dependent on physical properties, the death of the body ends the mental properties. And to use my usual analogy here, you can think of the body as like a sparkler, and the sparks are the mental properties. And so the sparkler burning causes the sparks, but the sparks don't in turn cause stuff in the sparkler. And when the sparkler burns out, what happens to the sparks? Well, the answer is, of course, the sparks are gone. You're left with a burnt out sparkler. And so for epiphenomenalism, there would be no ghosts, because the sparkler has burnt out. Now, one alternative that came up some years ago during a class discussion, which was not in the original article, was that the epiphenomena could find something else to epiphenomena on, that it could somehow still be an epiphenomena of a dead body. For example, in the TV show Supernatural, the way they deal with ghosts, dispose of them, is they have to typically, spoilers, if there's a ghost that's causing trouble, they go and burn the body. Or there's an object that it's attached to, and they go and destroy that object. And so the idea could be, if you use the supernatural metaphysics, that you could still have epiphenomenalism, that the sparks are coming off somehow the dead body, so to speak, and linked to it, and then the complete destruction of the body does lead to the destruction of the mental properties. And again, this came up some years after the article was written, but it would allow for some possibility of ghosts in that special way. But the original version, sort of standard epiphenomenalism, you would have no ghosts. But if you bring in sort of like the supernatural version, supernatural metaphysics, the show, then that would allow for ghosts. But in terms of questions about the article itself, epiphenomenalism would entail no ghosts. Now, the second type of property dualism is known as Interactionism. The mental properties of the mind and physical properties of the body, as you might gather, interact. So the mental properties can bring about changes in the physical properties of the body, and vice versa. The mental properties do not need to be entirely causally dependent on the physical properties of the body. So, the mental properties that make up the mind could, perhaps, possibly, survive the death of the body. And the mental properties might be able to exist as a bundle of properties. So if you accept a bundle view that there are no substances, then the bundle could keep on going. So going back to our good dead friend Hume and his bundle view, kind of modifying that, a ghost on this view could be a bundle of mental properties that form a mind without a physical body. So the physical properties are gone, but the mental properties remain. Now, you could have a theory that has both properties and substances. In fact, it's fairly common. And you could have it that the mental and physical properties are distinct, but there's not distinct types of substances. There's just one type of substance. And the mental properties might require some substance or body to support them. So in this view, it could be that a ghost is a mind consisting of mental properties supported by something other than its original body. Or, going back, again, this is not in the original version, but going back to the metaphysics of the Supernatural TV show, perhaps they still do have a connection to the original body that's, dead somehow. Alternatively, the mental properties might inhere in an object or place. This could help explain why ghosts typically are said to haunt particular places, and we generally, with some exceptions, don't hear about them traveling the world. So ghosts typically have a particular house or location they haunt, and you generally don't hear of ghosts getting on buses or planes, with some notable exceptions. So these mental properties may take over potentially a new body, and this would help explain like possession. And since the mental properties are capable of interacting with physical properties, this is interactionism after all, the mind could interact with the physical world even after bodily death. So property dualism does allow for the possibility of ghosts. The properties could keep on going post-death. The final theory of mind we'll look at, and it's not the only theory of minds out there, I just covered some of the most common ones, is what's called functionalism. And it's a very popular theory of mind. And it works like this. For the functionalist, mental states are defined in functional terms. So a functional definition of a mental state would provide an account of that mental state in terms of its role, or, to run in a circle, its function. And this would occur within a mental system of inputs and outputs. So a mental state will be defined in terms of the causal relations that it holds to external influences on the body, other mental states, and the behavior of the body. So, for example, pain would not be, a particular set of neurons firing. It would not be like mental properties, would not be the activity of a ghosty substance. It would be a set of inputs and outputs. To use a very simple example, an input might be stepping on a nail, and the output might be saying, ow. And so that would be the mental state. Whatever the input, someone that has the same input gives the same output. Now, this is usually taken to be a materialist view, a physicalist view of the mind. Functionalists tend to, if you were to ask them, hey, is that entity physical, or is there ghosty stuff? Their answer is typically, no, it's all physical. But you could have, this may seem kind of odd, but you could have immaterial functionalism, where the states are not states of a physical system, but the states of a incorporeal system. But again, typically it's a materialist, physicalist view. So how does this differ from identity theory? Well, the difference is this. For the identity theorist, each particular mental state is identical to a very specific physical state. I'm again going back to my example. If the taste of vanilla is those 3 neurons firing, then that is the taste of vanilla. So for 2 mental states to be the same, the physical states must be identical. So in identity theory, if mental states are particular states of neurons in a certain part of the human nervous system, then anything that doesn't have that sort of nervous system cannot have a mind. So again, going back to like the taste of vanilla, if the taste of vanilla is those 3 neurons firing, then anything that doesn't have those 3 neurons on the identity theorist view cannot have the taste of vanilla. And likewise for things like pain. If a particular pain is a set of neurons firing, then that is what it is to have that particular pain. And anything that doesn't have those exact neurons cannot experience that pain. Now, one of the motivations for functionalism was that it would seem that there could be entities that could feel pain, but wouldn't have, a nervous system identical to that of a human, non-humans. And so the functionalists came up with this. A particular mental state, like having a very particular pain or tasting vanilla, is not defined in terms of a particular physical state. Now, for the functionalists who are physicalists, every mental state would be a physical state of some kind. Now, if a functionalist was a immaterialist, then every mental state would be an immaterial state of some kind. But again, they're typically materialist. So for functionalism, for two mental states to be the same, they need only be functionally identical, not physically identical. So to use like an example, imagine you have humans like us, and then you have a species that's different from us. Like, we could take like a dog, for example. Now, for the identity theorist, the dog could not have the same taste of vanilla that we do because their brains would be different. Again, assuming they don't have the same neurons. But for the functionalist, the dogs could have the taste of vanilla because even though their brain structures are different, they could have the same input and same output. Namely, they could have the taste of vanilla and have a similar sort of, output from it. And also for things like pain. So in order to feel pain, an entity would just have to have the right inputs and outputs. So since mental states are defined functionally, anything that can have these functions could have a mind. So this entails that it's possible for ghosts to exist. How so? Well, given the definition of functionalism, essentially, preserving the function, having the same inputs and same outputs, any system that performs the proper functions would be a mind, regardless of how that system is constituted. It doesn't matter whether it's an organic system or a mechanical system. It doesn't matter whether it's a human brain or like an alien brain. So it certainly seems possible that a mind could suffer the loss of its original physical system, body, nervous system, etc., but retain the same or adequately similar functions afterwards. Now, for the physical functionalist, since the mind is a physical system, there's no special problem with it interacting with the physical world. Why not? Well, it's already physical. So if it gets a new physical system, it could keep interacting, with that. The new physical system could be a structure, could be a place, could be a new body. To use kind of a traditional ghost system or story, a person might die in a house, and consistent with the ghost stories, the mind might survive in the house as a set of functions existing on in a new system, that the house is now functioning like the body. Original body's dead, but the mind functions on. Now, you could also go, of course, with a technological one. I use the ghost in the shell example here intentionally, in the sense that a person could lose their original body, and if the mind is just a set of functions, as long as those functions are preserved, the mind would exist as a ghost. Original body dead, but they keep existing and keep interacting post-death. So in conclusion, I have obviously not settled the existence or non-existence of ghosts. But if dualism is correct, then it's possible for ghosts to exist. And they would be the classic, ghost of fiction, an incorporeal mind existing after the death of the body. Property dualism would also allow for the possibility of ghosts existing as a set of mental properties. Functionalism, as we saw, allows for a strange sort of ghost to exist, a functional ghost. Now, identity theory definitely does not allow for ghosts to exist, because if a person is their brain and the brain dies, that's it. There can't be ghost brain. Again, there could be zombies, but no ghost brain. Now, in the case of epiphenomenalism, again, for the original article, since it's sparking off, so to speak, metaphorically speaking, the physical properties, that would be the sparks are gone when the sparkler is out. But given the kind of odd metaphysics of in the TV show Supernatural, you could make the argument that the sparks could keep sparking off the remains somehow. And if you accept ghosts, that would not be too terribly weird. But identity theory, definitely no ghosts. But the other ones do allow for that possibility. So that ends ghosts.